Welcome everybody to our next session on the Quintessence podcast. Our theme for today's conversation is AI and the future of claims. Today, from an insurance industry perspective, which is historically considered risk averse and laggard from a technology adoption standpoint, is on the verge of a seismic tech-driven shift. Right, even before COVID, before the pandemic, customers were increasingly leading technology-centric lives, requiring insurers to transform service delivery and operating models. Now, with the recent shock, technology-enabled service delivery is non-negotiable and mission-critical. Today on the podcast, I've got two esteemed guests of mine, Aditya, Jain, and Bhaskar, Kalita, to help us delve into the disruptions because of the pandemic and the altered modernization visions for insurance carriers. In today's session, we will discuss how AI becomes increasingly integrated into claims servicing and how carriers are positioning themselves to respond to the changing business landscape. Our guests will also like to give a glimpse in terms of what the future of claims may look like, and we want to understand how can organizations plan to develop the skills, the talents, and embrace the emerging technologies and create the culture and perspective needed to succeed in the insurance industry of the future. My name is Pronoy. I'm your host for the day. I work with Quantiphi as an account manager. Today we've got our two guests, Aditya Jain, who is a practice director with the Everest Group. Aditya he leads the banking, financial services, insurance, IT services, and technology research programs. Aditya actively tracks digital services trends in the BFSI industry with a special focus on AI, cloud, big data, IoT, and automation services. In this role, Aditya has worked with numerous large insurance firms globally to support their decisions across technology bets and sourcing of best fit vendors. Aditya, welcome to the podcast. Looking forward to connecting with you. Our second guest on today's podcast is someone whom we know very well, Bhaskar, BK, fondly known as BK. Bhaskar leads the financial services and insurance vertical for Quantiphi, a category-defining applied AI and machine learning software and services company. He spent more than a decade in the insurance industry, solving transformational problems at the heart of businesses, ranging from core systems transformation to modernization of data platforms, and more recently, applying AI ML superpowers to reimagine fundamental business processes across the insurance value chain. BK, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let me give you a quick glimpse in terms of what the themes are for today's conversation. We'll take a look in terms of the impact that the pandemic has had in terms of claims modernization. We want to understand how have insurtechs tried to adapt to this whole modernization piece from a vision perspective, and what are some of the things that they're doing in order to change and adapt their claim servicing pipeline. Right. We also want to take a little bit deeper view in terms of what those inherent challenges are from a transformation perspective. How are some of the insurtechs mitigating and, more importantly, capitalizing on some of these challenges using data, machine learning, AI? And as we delve deeper into from an AI perspective, we want to understand how is it that the industry is looking at AI from an ethical roots perspective, right? We want to end on a theme where we want our guests to give us a glimpse in terms of the future holds and provide us with their insights, right? So I'll bring up Aditya in terms of the first question. Aditya, this is particularly for you. Want to understand what is the vision for claims modernization in the pre-pandemic era, and please give us a perspective on how it has been impacted and how the future has been impacted because of this pandemic.
Sure. So first of all, thanks, Pronoy, for the lovely introduction, and thanks to the Quantiphi team for having me here join this panel discussion again. Claims of the future or the claims transformation, a very critical topic or something that keeps us on our toes, and a lot of discussions happening on this particular topic. So great to be discussing this with your team. Now, to the question on the vision for the claims modernization. Now, before we really get into the details of the claims modernization vision, we should first try to understand the shift in business philosophy of insurance companies, right? So earlier, the value articulation was primarily focused on ensuring a risk and then being more effective at paying claims. But now, we are seeing that insurers are making that pivot from being just an assurer to becoming a guardian, right? Which really means that they're looking to evolve their focus from insuring loss to ensuring protection and becoming a risk mitigation provider, right? Now, this is the biggest change that has had a downstream impact on the claims modernization priorities as well, as insurers are not just looking to manage a claim better, but then trying to prevent the occurrence of these claims, right? Now, in terms of technology priorities for the claims modernization journey before the pandemic, it was primarily around enabling faster claims, so straight through processing for small ticket items, AI enabled chatbots, mobile apps for better customer engagement. That's wherein we saw most of the action, right? But then investments into such technologies at that point was still considered as a point of differentiation, but not anymore. So even if you look at a recent survey from TransUnion, right, it reveals that digitization has accelerated by 20% for insurers globally post the pandemic. So today, having a digital first operating model, it's a must have for carriers if they wish to compete with both the traditional players as well as the new age insurtechs. Customers now expect touchless experiences throughout the value chain, especially across claims management, right? The use of AI and associated technologies such as machine learning and higher order analytics, they have become one of the top most priorities for the insurance CIOs. So we see carriers today to be actively investing in conversational AIs, scaling the straight through processing of claims, even for more complex submissions, using analytics to strengthen their claims fraud detection capabilities. Another use case gaining traction within carriers is the use of AI in the claims triage process, right? Which can help them identify complex or severe claims early so that claims can be triaged to the most qualified adjuster as well. So those are the kind of, some of the themes that we are seeing becoming more prominent in today's world.
Super, Aditya. Thanks for that broad overview. I think you touched upon several themes. I will bring them up in the conversation. I do want to focus on one element that you mentioned, that is around the triaging process, and I'll bring BK in terms of in terms of his perspective. BK, question to you is, how do you see top insurers minimize the friction in claims assessment and typically the processing part of it, given that we've just gone through the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think Aditya covered a lot of various use cases that insurers have started, delving into, making them a reality. Just talking about claims assessment, some of the things that we are seeing being more and more used are, usage of techniques like knowledge graphs, where you can adjudicate claims upfront, right? You don't wait for a claims to hit a bucket. An adjuster comes in, start reviewing it. You want to provide them intelligent inputs, so when a claims comes in, obviously there is automation in the process where a lot of carriers have invested in making sure the FNL process is streamlined. Proof of losses that are getting submitted are extracted automatically, information is fed in. But beyond that, I think the next wave of transformation or changes that are coming in this process is, how do I provide intelligent information to my adjusters? While this is the first step of making this whole process straight through in a way, but at the end of the day, you need specialists to look at complex cases. So what you will do, will provide intelligent information. So usage of knowledge graphs is an important aspect. Third party data, how can you pull third party data, create the analytics that Aditya spoke about, and then provide those information to your adjusters and specialists. That's becoming a norm in a way. And then finally, making lives easier for your specialists and adjusters. How can you give them an experience where they can do things faster, better, and in a more efficient way, right? So when I look at the whole assessment process, it's about bringing in intelligence in the process, providing that intelligent information to your specialists and adjusters, and then improving the whole experience from an adjuster perspective, right? And again, I'm going to repeat the point that Aditya mentioned, which is claims usually used to start from FNOL all the way to case management, assessments, and then payments. But now prevention is becoming a norm and becoming a priority. You want to make sure a claim doesn't originate at the first place, and that's where lot of carriers are bringing in differentiating services along with the usual elements of risk protection.
Super. That I think that's a great perspective, BK. Thanks for articulating it that way. Um, Aditya, I'll bring you in another perspective. Of course, you spent significant time in the industry looking at how leaders want to understand some of these change, right? How can leaders drive some of these differentiation in their businesses? Insurtechs have been a common theme. Can you share your perspective on how the insurance industry looks at insurtechs particularly and specialists who are part of the broader sourcing portfolio for modernization of what we call the claims value chain, right? I mean, what business functions are on top of priorities for our insurance CXOs?
Yeah, sure, Pronoy. So I think I don't know if I can do justice by just one line, right? But then InsurTech's definitely leading the way in leveraging digital technologies to power business model innovation as well as product development. And the success is evident, right? Now, from an enterprise perspective, right, the major change that we have observed in the last 18 months is the openness and aggression with which some of these traditional carriers have started to collaborate with these insurtechs, right? Now they have realized that the time to market is critical, and in order to drive that competitive advantage, they need to look beyond their enterprise boundaries to take advantage of the great innovation that is happening in the industry, right? And I can use a few examples. Geico, for instance, they partnered with an insurtech to speed up vehicle repairs for auto insurance customers. Maffer Insurance, they partnered with another insurtech now to deliver a superior claims experience by streamlining and automating the homeowner insurance claims processes. Right, so there are different ways, but I would say the primary way in which we are seeing insurers to be engaging with these insurtechs is specifically for those plug-and-play solutions that can be deployed in a matter of few weeks to get ahead of their peers. Right, so engagement with such players is largely constructed in a partnership manner where either the specialist is involved in the solution delivery, or in certain cases, we've also seen instances wherein carriers will involve a potentially a third party IT services provider as an SI for the broader systems configuration. But in either scenario, the point is InsurTechs definitely gaining higher traction and are expected to play a bigger role as part of the broader sourcing portfolio for these insurers. Now to the second part of the question on key priorities, right? I would like to call out four areas, right? The first is essentially around improving the claims response time, wherein insurers are trying to balance human and digital touchpoints to support the claimants, right? So we're seeing increasing traction for technologies such as NLP, computer vision to build robust bots that can help transform the capabilities of some of these contact centers and customer service centers in tandem with agents. That's number one. Number two, I would say the focus around optimizing the claims ratio by deploying advanced analytics, big data solutions to triage claims and prevent the claims fraud leakage, right? So, insurtechs that have been able to augment the current data sets, or in some cases, even analyze those data sets at speed and scale to improve those fraud identification capabilities, they are definitely gaining prominence. Third, I would say around building remote solutions for claims proof and quantification tests, right? So, for instance, Tokyo Marine has implemented a faster claims adjudication system to ensure faster cycle time and a safer claims damage assessment, right? And their solution also leverages an AI-based algorithm that uses remote images for the damage assessment. The fourth and last, and I believe it's again very, very important, is around digital payments, right? So insurtechs that allow carriers with options to quickly accept and then disburse payments via a wide range of payment methods and channels. They help to improve the broader digital engagement capabilities and eventually help to close the claims faster. They are the ones who are again gaining a lot of traction, right? So that those are the four areas that I have in mind.
Thanks, Aditya. That's a wonderful articulation in terms of how you laid it out. Typically, it's a charter for a CIO if I look at it that way, right? I want to bring in BK on this element as well. BK, you have seen the industry and industry leaders very very closely, right? In your experience, I want you to talk a little bit about one, how you've seen that evolution, right, for an insurtech. The other question I have for you is, I wanted to tell our viewers in terms of how insurtechs, and particularly like someone like Quantiphi, right, the organizations such as ours, are helping carriers build robust touchless claim servicing pipelines of the future, right, using AI/ML, cloud computing and some of the capabilities that Aditya touched upon?
Sure. So first of all, I'll, concur and echo what Aditya just called out. Insurtechs are now part of the sourcing portfolio. They are widely considered for various reasons. I mean, you look at point in solutions for a particular problem. You have insurtechs coming with pre-built solutions, off-the-shelf products, which can be onboarded in 2 to 3 weeks, right? So that's always part of the sourcing portfolio. We are also seeing customers using point-in-time solutions to augment their existing infrastructure. For example, fraud. The example that Aditya gave, fraud. You have carriers not relying on only one insurtech. They will buy fraud solutions from two to three different insurtechs, and then use them concurrently in their process, right? So that's one. Now then comes firms like Quantiphi, who are an AI first digital engineering firm. So what we provide is a combination of products, solutions focused on specific pain points, as well as capabilities to orchestrate the end-to-end transformation. So I'll take the example of claims, and where we have kind of modernized the end-to-end journey from a claim coming in all the way to a check or a EOB going out, right? So, or a payment going out, which involves obviously the front end part where you have contact centers which can seamlessly get information, can be used as an FNOL step. You have documents coming in, extracting information and the right information out of documents, putting that bionic layer where you have human in the loop, which makes sure accurate information is going to the assessment phase.
Yep.
Where again you use technical knowledge graphs where you can look at an incoming claim, figure out what's the possible adjudication step, give those intelligent information to your carrier, to your adjusters and specialists, and give them a platform or an experience where they can adjudicate those claims faster in a cloud native environment. So this particular solution involves obviously setting up the infrastructure, which is the first foundational layer, a cloud native infrastructure. On top, you have to set up the data layer where all the data will come, and you will eventually use lakes, hubs, in fact, sometimes warehouses as well to pull data in. And then on top of it, you have layers of insights, layers of automation, and then finally the experience layer. So that's the overall AI first digital engineering value chain, which firms like Quantiphi provides.
Super. Thanks, BK. I will touch upon. I think you mentioned couple of points that that are very interesting. You mentioned about the whole bionic piece. I will come back to that as well. Interaction between humans and machine. My next theme though is specific to challenges, right? BK, you've painted the picture in terms of what the art of the possible is. And I want to get Aditya in on understanding what are some of those inherent challenges of a digital transformation program per se that insurers should typically be wary of.
Yep, and I think it makes a lot of sense to discuss this area, right? Because this comes in different shapes and forms. Now, and I'll be honest, right? The biggest challenge that we see in the industry is in the way enterprises or these carriers, they define digital transformation, right? So we've seen instances of firms making only some of these peripheral changes, or in some cases even just adopting some of the modern front end systems and then calling it digital transformation. But then none of these firms are able to realize the true value from such investment. So the first big challenge, honestly, is more internal in terms of bringing in the business and the IT stakeholders together, clearly define the end state, that has succinct roadmap for front to back modernization. What are the end business outcomes, and then are we putting in a robust governance structure to really monitor the transformation and the pace at which it's progressing, right? So that's step one. Second, I would say, is around scalability and pace of these efforts, right? So these journeys, they definitely require a differentiated talent pool to drive initiatives at speed and scale. Now, there's a massive demand supply gap for specialized skill sets. Now, we were doing some research, and we also identified that this gap is as high as 35% for areas such as data science in developed geos like the US. So lack, and on top of it, lack of a compelling talent value proposition that these insurers have to kind of attract and retain such talent, that also hinders the progress of such initiatives, right? Thirdly, as insurers try to set up a digital first operating model and then even deal with a much more complex digital infrastructure, there are a lot of risks around data breaches and compliance. And we've seen instances wherein insurers haven't thought of, having a robust risk and compliance strategy, or even lack of some of those proactive investments to boost the cybersecurity standards that align with the newer ways of working. That also creates a very big risk, right? And lastly, a pressing challenge that can hinder an insurer's digital transformation journey, it's around dysfunctional change management. Now, challenges around poor planning and management, employee resistance, lack of executive sponsorship that can often derail digital transformation programs that might be actually technologically very, very sound. So I think a sum total of all of these, with respect to talent, process, technologies, operating model, a lot of these, vein to kind of, paint a true picture of what that digital transformation means and how we need to really progress on it in a phased wise and in a very consistent manner.
Interesting. You mentioned some of these elements, and I'd like to get BK in as well. BK has seen leaders, has seen some of these programs get delivered. BK, my question to you is, based on your experience, how does the industry leaders and how does the industry in specific deal with some of these, some of these challenges that are so prevalent?
Yeah, so I think Aditya covered a lot of good points in terms of challenges. I think one of the things that I want to pick up is around, you know, executive sponsorship. To do these kind of transformation, you obviously need executive sponsorship, and that's a prevalent challenge, primarily driven with the fact that these technologies are new, haven't been tried in the past. So for the board, for the C-suite to give a go ahead to go and do a large scale 4 to 5 year transformation program is not easy, and probably not recommended as well. So what we prescribe to our customers is to take the approach of breaking down large transformation programs to smaller chunks. How can you show value early? And I will deliberately not use the term MVP here, which is a minimum viable product, because it sounds constraining, which is basically you are creating the product based on your constraints. I'll use the term called MLP, which is most lovable product, where you are taking the customer centric view and taking and creating something that attracts your end consumers, whether be it a broker, agent, or your end customers, right? So how can you break it down to an MLP and show value early? And to do that, you also have to do a bunch of precursors, which is basically taking care of ideation, taking care of proof of concepts, proof of technologies, making the executives comfortable in this particular to start the journey. And then obviously the MLP will drive the future adoption or sponsorship. Number two point that Aditya mentioned was about cybersecurity. This is a big deal at this moment. I mean, take the case of CNA, where they were out of business for almost few weeks, where there was a cyber attack. So it's extremely important, with cloud taking center stage in terms of infrastructure, in terms of taking workloads. So obviously, yes, cloud security is paramount at this moment. At the same time, we are also seeing trends where a lot of carriers are trying to bring workloads in-house as well, depending on the severity as well as the intensity of compute. A lot of carriers have started realizing that consumption is good. You need to also do certain workloads in-house to drive costs down. That's where NVIDIA DGX boxes plays a big role here, right? So that's number two, which I would call out. And number three is in terms of execution. That's where I think, and Aditya covered that as well, where shortage of talent, etc., it's a big deal, right? And on top of it, most carriers have an aging workforce that have worked on legacy tech. So along with modernization, it's important to upskill your own people as well. Upskill them, infuse fresh blood, create a homogeneous mix of people having domain knowledge of how business is being driven in a particular career landscape, as well as bringing technology experts to the mix. And that's where InsurTech plays a big role, where they can come help a career evolve in their journey from a talent perspective as well, right? And that's where firms like Quantiphi, we've been doing a lot of work for clients where we engage ourselves, be their arm, be their data science arm for a time being, help them also evolve their internal data science practice, and then eventually take it over, right? So that's the third element where we're seeing a lot of insurtechs tackling some of the core challenges that we're seeing, and the hindrance and the barriers for these kind of transformation problems.
Super. I think your perspective adds so much value to the next question that I have. Before I get there, I just want to bring back a couple of points, right, that we heard so far. We heard about Bionic, right? The interaction between man and machine. I love the concept of the most lovable product. It's a very customer oriented way of thinking. I want to understand. I want, my next theme is around how do you drive more trust in this newness in terms of systems, right? And in terms of adoption of AI from a accountability and responsibility perspectives. My question first is to Aditya. Aditya, I want to understand if you can elaborate a little bit on the importance of having a well-defined ethical framework for, let's say, something like an AI-led decision-making system, and what some of those frameworks are that industry leaders are starting to adhere.
Yep. So I think first, from a context of setting and just elaborating a bit more on the need for this, right? So we need to first realize the fact that the insurance industry runs on data. Now, if all of these insurers have built such large data estates, the challenge is how to harness the potential of that data, right? And like everyone else, carriers have turned to AI, other big data technologies for help. But then, with the increasing adoption of these technologies, there are bigger issues, concerns rather, around ensuring that this AI is used ethically in ways that enhance rather than diminish trust and customer confidence, right? So challenges in making AI ethical, I would say they revolve around three broad tangents, right? So one, how do you make these models explainable and transparent? Number two, how do you ensure that there are no inherent biases in data and algorithms? And third, how do you create a sense of accountability and responsibility regarding the outcomes, regarding data privacy, and then security as well, right? And there have been multiple instances recently wherein some of these inherent biases in data sets, they have led to race or gender based biases in the AI's decision making. In most cases, these have only been revealed once the AI is in production. So in fact, one of the key factors that inhibit insurers from unleashing the art of the possible through AI is the concern around this transparency and accountability. And as these insurers look to deploy AI for how high potential outcomes, the need for this explanation and this unbiased AI, that definitely increases. Now, to the second part, in terms of how some of the firms are trying to evaluate it, right? So in most cases, what we have seen is that an ethical AI framework is a set of principles that are put together, but then they lack specificity, they lack contextualization to the underlying use case, right? So rather than focusing on one defined framework, we see the front runners to be focusing on eliminating that black box mindset and building a set of use case specific, contextualized guiding principles across the three key stages of AI development, right? First will be the data phase, wherein the focus is on avoiding reliance purely on historical data and leveraging some of these custom built sample data sets that are more comprehensive and bias free. Now, this is very, very critical to avoid the age old problem of garbage in, garbage out. That's one. Number two, I would say the functionality stage, right? Now, herein the focus is on gathering insights on decision making mechanisms to validate that the process is transparent and it is in accordance with the expectations and understanding. And lastly, the outcome stage, right? When the focus is on gathering insights on the decision making outcomes to identify and rectify any ethical challenges before the AI goes into production. So I think across the three phases, there has to be an oversight to ensure that once we are live, the algorithms are bias free, and the outcomes or the decisions, they help to kind of ensuring that customer confidence.
Interesting. I think interesting elements that you picked up. Let me bring BK into this, right? BK, in terms of your view and the vantage point that you have, how do you see the industry developing? Some of these elements from a responsible and accountable AI models, typically to the elements that Aditya mentioned, right, which are free of bias, which have which are transparent and explainable, to probably get to an AI first future.
Sure. So there is obviously a tech component here, and there is also a significant portion of human component here as well. So I'll first answer the tech part, which involves three stages. When you look at using AI models, it has to start with the data, and I think Aditya made a valid point: garbage in, garbage out. If you don't take care of your data, so doing data analysis, making sure your data description standardization is taking place, summarization, making sure explainable feature engineering has already taken place is critical. This is called pre-modeling explainability. That's number one. Number two, while you are in the process of building models, that's when you start bringing in explainability. Adopt explainable model families, make regularizations, architectural adjustments, etc. So that's the second phase, which is doing changes when you are in the process of building models. And then post that, when you are validating your models, bringing explainability at that stage is super critical. You can obviously use various techniques here: backward propagation, proxy models, activation optimizations. There are a bunch of things that you can do in terms of post modeling. But I also would like to bring in the human element here. At the end of the day, the biggest barrier for adoption of AI or large scale adoption of AI is this whole thought process of is it free of bias or not? Is it all there are question marks around AI models, right? I mean, will it differentiate certain segment of the society and things like that, right? So for that, you need to make your users comfortable as well with the output of the model. For that, it's just not this model, this techniques from a technology standpoint, but it is also explaining them data in a very different way, right? There are if you and it will be line specific. When I talk about line, I'm talking about insurance lines. A workers' comp insurance may need a very different treatment in terms of how do you make your users comfortable or your adjusters comfortable with the output of the model. You might have to use techniques like giving them random checks. You have to do humanized the explainability, which is explaining them how the model is behaved, providing them outputs in a particular format that is needed. For a line like workers' comp, it might be very different. For personal lines, it might be very different. But the human element is extremely critical in terms of making sure you are able to build a solution and make your stakeholders comfortable as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Thanks for the insight. It's great to see the different perspectives that you mentioned about. But absolutely, the highlight is the whole the human side and the explainable side of it. Thanks, BK. I want to move to the other question. As a precursor, I think I first of all I'd like to thank both of you for bringing in a lot of perspective. From what an insurance industry would think of, from what leaders are thinking about, right? From what insurtechs are looking at. My next question to both of you, and Aditya, if you can go first, is through the lens of a customer, right? If you see through the eyes of a customer in 2030, what's the big change that you're seeing in the whole insurance value chain?
Yep. So honestly, in 8 years, I think anything and everything could happen looking at the pace of technology disruption, right? So, but then specifically from an insurance and claims perspective, right? So we can definitely expect a well-connected claims network. That's number one, right? So right from initiation of that first notice of loss to the assessment of claims to eventually the payout phase, everything, in my opinion, would become seamless, right? Except for some of those complex or high value claim payouts. And again, going back to BK's point earlier, the need for that human element that still exists, right? So hyper automation, IoT sensors, telematics devices, that would potentially be a norm for auto insurers to provide adequate coverage to traditional vehicles, but then also to electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles. I think that will also kick in. Number two, from an agents and brokers perspective, I believe that would also evolve, right, in terms of their role to become more of an advisor to their clients about their financial goals, about their personal goals, about the cross, and that will essentially lead to a lot of cross selling and upselling additional coverages to the policies based on important life events, as even the engagement spans through multiple other elements and having a much more holistic understanding of the end customer. Now, thanks to the ubiquity of some of these smart devices, we'll also see insurance being embedded in the lifestyle of consumers, right? So consumers will expect to see dynamic changes to their insurance premiums based on their daily habits. It could be, things like their dietary routine, maintaining good driver behavior, proactively monitoring their homes and possessions. But then, how would it vary for different carriers? I think the insurers, they'll come closer to the consumers in the choices that they make on an everyday basis, and they help them in making those better decisions to lower the overall risk against which they have broad protection, right? So in other words, while insurer as an entity might really become invisible to the end customer, insurance as a product, that will largely get closely integrated across all of these customer buying journeys. So I think that's one big shift that I'm not just projecting, but I'm hopeful, that this will happen in the next 8 years.
Interesting perspective, BK. Want to get your thoughts on how do you see the future evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll talk about three things. Number one, and Aditya spoke about it at the start of this podcast, which is, prevention will take center stage. And I see that becoming a norm by the time we hit 2030. That's number one. Number two, I would like to call out is in terms, can you even pay before a claim is filed? That's something, a lot of insurers are trying to figure out, getting, you know, insurance claims is all about getting the proof of loss. But if you know about the loss before a consumer has sent you the data, that it helps expedite a lot of things. So I think that's an area where I do see a lot of carriers experimenting, and by 2030, a lot of lines might move into that direction where you are paying upfront, instead of before a claims is even filed, and kind of dramatically change the way claims management happen right now. And the third one, I think Aditya spoke about it, coverages, newer type of coverages, etc. I definitely see the risk paradigm changing. You will have to create newer set of products, a newer set of risks will evolve, and then how do you bundle different coverages together and give a product to a customer where they feel comfortable, they feel that they are protected holistically. They're not looking for a Geico to give them car insurance and then a Liberty Mutual giving them specialty coverages, etc. How do you holistically provide coverages for all your assets and loved ones together? So that's the area where I believe the insurance industry will move, and claims will, claims management will obviously evolve similarly.
Super, super. That's a great overview. Um, this was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for taking out the time. That's all we had from our guests. Once again, thanks a lot to BK and Aditya for their insightful perspectives. I think we've got a broad range of insights across different themes, right? In terms of understanding modernization, understanding challenges, getting an insider view of how such programs benefit carriers in the larger scale. To summarize, the insurance industry is already seeing several innovation initiatives that are going to change the way carriers operate in the future. Right. Most importantly, I think today's conversation captured and provided a great glimpse of how AI-driven insight is going to be positioned at the point of experience. That's about it from my side. Stay tuned for more such insightful conversations on Quintessence.